You see, it's a curious thing that we say falling in love. We don't say rising into love. That would suggest effort, achievement, a sort of conquest. But falling, now that tells you something deeper. There's the sense of the ground giving way beneath you, of losing your balance. And we don't much care for that, do we? The whole business of being a proper, sensible individual is to be in control, upright, watchful, secure. So to fall in love, to truly fall, is in a way to go mad. Not the kind of madness you lock away in asylums, no, but a sort of unreasonableness, a letting go of the usual caution. It is, in a very real sense, a risk, a gamble, because you see, love, real love is not safe. It does not come with guarantees. It doesn't say, if you love me, I'll behave a certain way. No, it strikes like lightning. You don't know how or why. It just comes. And you are changed. And that change, well, it's a sort of death, isn't it? The death of the ego. The collapse of that little fortress you've been guarding. And that's why people resist it. For life itself is always a risk. Every step you take is taken on faith. You walk, but you do not know that the floor will hold. You speak, but you cannot be sure the words will land. And yet you walk, and you speak, you live, because something in you trusts the process. So too with love. To fall in love is to give yourself over to something you cannot understand, to allow yourself to be touched, moved, and altered. And it's quite mad. But that madness is precisely what makes it sane. To resist it, to say, no, I must remain upright and unaffected, is to deny the most essential part of being alive. For love, like life, is a risk, a gamble. Every step we take, every path we follow, we walk by faith, not by certainty. When you fall in love, you are saying, I am willing to surrender, to give myself up into the unknown. And that is the boldest thing a human being can do. Now let us look more closely at this idea of surrender, because it's central to love. Love is not a matter of control. In fact, it's the very opposite. It is an act of surrender to another person, a giving of oneself completely, without reservation. Not because you're being noble or self-sacrificing, no, but because it's the only thing that can actually work. You see, all the sensible people in the world are busy holding on, watching their step, managing outcomes. And the more they hold on, the tighter they grasp, the less alive they become. But the person in love, they let go. They say, here I am, take me, do as you will. And of course that sounds outrageous. People say, you can't do that, you'll get hurt. Yes, you might. But the alternative is to never love at all, to stay locked in yourself, untouched and untouchable. And that, you see, is the real tragedy. Because when you try to protect yourself from love, you also shut yourself off from life. You cannot say, I want to experience the fullness of life, but I don't want any surprises. It doesn't work like that. Life and love are of the same fabric, they move in uncertainty. And it is only when you move with them instead of against them that you begin to understand. So we must understand that love is not sensible. It's not a matter of policy. You don't enter into it like a contract, I'll love you if you meet my conditions. That isn't love. That's an arrangement. And yet, so many people go about it that way. They say, I must find the perfect partner, the one who completes me, fulfills me, understands me entirely. But such expectations are bound to disappoint, for no one can complete you. And if you are not whole to begin with, you will only make a demand out of your love, a sort of bargain, a transaction dressed up in tenderness. But love, real love, is not a bargain, it is a letting go. And that, I say, is the highest wisdom. To give yourself without knowing what will come of it, to say yes to uncertainty. To walk into the forest, not knowing the path, that is love. And if it seems mad, well, then let it be mad. Because the world that pretends to be sane, to be orderly and proper, that's the world, on the edge of blowing itself to bits. So perhaps it is the lovers, the ones who are willing to fall, who are in the end the only truly sane ones. Now all our institutions, our churches, our schools, our governments are built around the idea of control, of watching, guarding, keeping everything in tidy lines. But love mocks these lines. It flows beyond them, around them, dissolves them altogether, and so most people are terrified of it, because to love, truly, is to allow yourself to be undone. You see, the ego, that brittle sense of me, cannot survive love. It vanishes like a shadow in sunlight. And this is precisely what makes love feel dangerous to the unprepared. It threatens their identity, their story, their narrative of self. And so they resist, they grasp. They try to make love manageable, secure, predictable. But love will not be caged. The wise, the truly wise, learn to let go, not with recklessness, but with reverence. With the quiet understanding that to live at all is to risk everything. To love someone is not to possess them, not to anchor them, but to see them, truly see them, and allow them to be as they are. Marriage, for instance, was once understood not as a prison of obligation, but as a friendship of mutual freedom, a setting loose of two souls who choose, day by day, to walk beside each other. And in that space of honesty, not pretending to feel what you no longer feel, not clinging to outdated vows, but facing one another openly, there is love. Now there are those who try to simulate love, to perform it, as it were, and this, you must know, is always destructive. For false love builds resentment on both sides. The one pretending grows bitter, and the one deceived feels the sting of absence. Real love has no script. It arises naturally, like laughter or sunlight. And when you find it, when it moves in you, the only sane response is to let it do what it must, even if it changes you, especially if it changes you. Because love, in the end, is not what you hold, it is what holds you. Now you may say, all right, this idea of surrendering to love is all very well, but what if I don't feel it? What if love doesn't come naturally to me? What if I really do try to love others, to be kind, to give of myself, and still it feels false? Well, you see, you cannot teach a selfish person to be unselfish by any method that appeals to his selfishness. That is to say, a person can give away everything he owns, or offer up his body to be burned, and still be acting out of the most cunning self-interest. It can be done, oh yes, with marvelous subtlety, a kind of spiritual one-upmanship. He may appear generous, saintly even, but deep underneath he's still on the take. And that kind of love, what we might call simulated love, is always, always destructive. It leaves behind a bitterness. It builds resentment not only in the one performing the false loving, but also in the poor soul on the receiving end, who begins to suspect that something is off, though they may not know exactly what. This is why so many of our efforts at kindness, at helping, at charitable love fail. They fail because they are not honest. They come not from the heart, but from a posture, from an idea about how one ought to behave. And in doing so, they create not connection, but distance. So what do? Are we to wait around doing nothing until some mysterious grace descends and we suddenly feel real love? Must we sit idly by, selfish as ever, until we're somehow transformed? No, not quite. But there is something to be said for honesty, because that honesty is the beginning of transformation. If, when you look closely at yourself, you discover that you are selfish, then be selfish. But do it consciously. Do it with open eyes. Ask yourself, what is it that I love, even selfishly? What do I cling to? What moves me? For even that clinging, that craving, that too is love. The force is there. It's simply moving in a particular direction. Like water through a hose, it depends which way you're aiming it. Some people love whiskey, others love admiration, some love beauty, or power, or ice cream. And you may say, but that's not real love, that's attachment. But I tell you, it is the same energy. It's simply beginning at the narrow end. So rather than trying to smother it, rather than pretending you're full of divine compassion, when really all you want is another drink, follow the love you do feel. Examine it. Let it run. For only when love is moving can it be redirected. You cannot steer a ship that is still anchored in the harbor. This, you see, is where most go wrong. They think they must first become spiritual, enlightened, holy, then they will be ready to love. But it's the other way around. You begin with where you are. with what truly stirs your heart, even if it seems small or selfish. And if you follow that thread honestly, it will lead you, it will grow. Because as you inquire into what you love, you will find always that what you love is not truly yourself. Not in the ego sense. Even if it begins with you saying, I love myself, and you try to hold that thought, try to grab at this self that you're loving, it slips away. It's like trying to kiss your own lips. You chase it round and round in a circle, and it always evades you. But curiously, when you look at what you do love, whether it's poetry, or a fine meal, or a person's laughter, or even the way the clouds look just before a storm, you discover that what you love is always something outside of what you normally call me. And so, by following your selfishness with honesty, not guilt, not shame, but real attention, you begin to find that the boundary between self and other is not so solid after all. And this, you see, is where something remarkable begins to happen. Not because you forced it, or planned it, or tried to become something holy, but because you simply stopped pretending, you stopped posturing. You let the energy move. And in doing so, it begins to transform you. Now we come to a very subtle mistake people make. They imagine there are different kinds of love, as if one were high and pure and another low and carnal. They say, this is real love, spiritual love, and then sneer at the other and say, that's just lust, or mere infatuation. But that division, you see, is entirely artificial. It is based not in perception, but in judgment. For love, in truth, is one single energy. It may take different shapes, just as white light divides itself into the colors of the spectrum, but it is not a different light. You may say the red end of that spectrum is what Freud called libido erotic love, physical desire. And then, moving up through the blues and greens, you come into friendship, companionship, tenderness. And then, at the violet end, you find agape, so-called divine charity, spiritual love. But this division is not one of substance, only of tone. You see, even the most physical, most passionate longing is part of that same current. And the error is in thinking that you can reject one part of it and cultivate the other, like trimming a tree from the top down and expecting it to grow properly. But life doesn't work that way. There's an idea, especially in religious circles, that if you want to find the higher forms of love, you must cut off the lower. You must deny desire, renounce passion, suppress the senses, and only then will the pure kind of love arise. But this is a confusion. The problem isn't that lust exists. The problem is that people are afraid of it. They don't trust themselves to follow the current without being drowned in it. But the truth is, and this is rather beautiful, you let the energy move, and it clarifies itself. The same way a stream begins as a muddy trickle, and by flowing becomes clear. If you dam it up, if you hold it back out of fear, the water stagnates. So instead of condemning the so-called lower forms of love, we might do better to honor where love appears, however strange or unrefined it seems. For there is no need to purify love by cutting parts of it away. You purify it by letting it move freely. And when you really let love move, that is to say, when you follow it without clinging, without turning it into a demand, it begins to show you things. You find the person you desire is not merely a collection of pleasing sensations. No, they are a mystery, a window into something vast and ungraspable. That's when love turns into wonder. But it does so on its own, you see, not because you forced it upward, not because you were pious, but because you were sincere. There is, after all, no merit in pretending not to feel desire when you do. That is not virtue. That is fear wearing the mask of discipline. And fear is no soil for love to grow in. So what we must learn is not to divide love, not to say this part is sacred and that part is shameful, but to recognize that all of it is part of one single movement. Whether you are embracing a lover, or helping a child tie their shoes, or simply watching the evening light fall on the hills, it is the same energy. It is life beholding itself, and the moment you try to possess it, to label it, to capture it, you lose it. Because love, like life, is not a substance, but a flow. And it will not be dammed up or boxed in. So let it move. Let it surprise you. Let it show up in the places you least expect, in the touch of a stranger's hand, in the way the wind brushes your cheek, in the sudden ache of seeing someone who reminds you of a long-lost friend. And you may find, quite by accident, that love was never divided at all. It was always one thing playing many roles. Now this brings us to something rather delicate, the matter of marriage. You see, we've got the whole thing upside down, because in our society, we expect marriage to be based on romantic love, this mysterious, uncontrollable, illogical experience of falling for someone. We expect to be in love before we marry, and we expect to stay in love after we do. And when love as it must shifts its shape, or withdraws for a time, people begin to think something is terribly wrong. But that, you see, is only because the whole thing was built on a misunderstanding. Falling in love, as we've said, is not something you can arrange. It happens. It strikes. And while it is very real, it is also unpredictable. It comes without warning, and it may leave just as mysteriously. So when you base a lifelong commitment on an event as capricious as falling in love, you are building on sand. That's why so many people end up trapped in what I call a pseudo-love affair. They felt passion, hot and strong, and mistook that for the kind of enduring bond needed to build a life together. But when the heat fades, and it will fade, they look across the room and wonder, who is this person I've married? Why don't I feel what I used to feel? And then perhaps they fall in love with someone else suddenly, shockingly, and feel torn between duty and desire. The whole foundation trembles, and families fall to pieces. But the real problem is not the falling in love. The real problem is that we thought love could be secured by an institution, that a ceremony, a ring, a set of vows could guarantee the constancy of the heart. It cannot. Now, this is not to say marriage is wrong, not at all. In fact, marriage can be a beautiful thing, but only if we understand it differently. The older idea, and in many ways the wiser one, was that marriage was a reasonable contract between two people. It was not meant to be a prison of perpetual passion, but a partnership, a cooperation in building a home, raising children, living together as companions. And in that arrangement, love, as we've been speaking of, it could come and go, rise and fall, without threatening the entire structure. If the two people involved were honest with one another, if they said, I marry you because I respect you, I enjoy your company, and I trust you as someone to walk beside, then there is space. Space to allow each person to be who they are. Not a shadow, not a mirror, but a self. And if, within that arrangement, they are also sexually and emotionally drawn to one another, well, so much the better. But that attraction, real as it may be, should not be the foundation. You see, the real virtue in such a marriage is truthfulness, not permanence. It is not saying, I will always feel the same toward you, but rather, I will not lie about what I feel. That is a much deeper commitment. It means not pretending when the feeling changes. It means not clinging when the wind shifts. It means respecting the other not as an extension of yourself, but as a living being who may grow in directions you cannot predict. And it also means this, that if love, unexpected and uninvited, comes to one of you from another source, it is not necessarily a betrayal, it is a happening, something that must be acknowledged with care, but not condemned out of hand. What ruins marriages is not love for another, it is dishonesty. It is the pretense that nothing is changing when everything is. So perhaps we should begin to think of marriage, if it is to be holy, not as the chaining of two people together, but as a mutual setting free, a choosing again and again, to walk together not out of obligation, but out of recognition. Out of the quiet joy of seeing, yes, there you are, still you, still new, still becoming. And that, you see, makes room for love to breathe. It is not a love that must always burn brightly. Sometimes it will flicker, sometimes it will dim. But in that space of honesty and freedom, it is allowed to find its own rhythm, like the moon pulling at the tide. And when love is allowed to come and go without being caged, it often returns deeper, wiser, and far more real. Now then, what happens when you stop trying to love? When you give up the whole idea of how it's supposed to feel, what it should look like, how long it must last, and simply allow love to arise as it will, like a breeze through an open window, you begin to see that love is not something you do. It's not a performance or an effort. It's not manufactured through virtue or discipline. It's something that arises like breath, like laughter, like birdsong at dawn, when you are no longer trying to control it. And that, you see, is the mystery. Love does not flow from you. It flows through you. When you stop grasping, stop making bargains with the universe, love begins to appear everywhere. In the face of a stranger, in the sound of rain on an old roof, in the trembling of your own hands. And when it does, don't cling. Let it move. Let it rise and fall. For love, like water, cannot be held without being lost. You see, it's like drifting on a river. The current is strong, and you don't know where it's taking you. But the more you thrash and fight, the more you go under. Yet if you relax, if you float, the river carries you. Not always where you expected, but often where you most needed to go. And so, to love is to trust the current, not to know its destination, not to chart its course, but to give yourself to it entirely. This is the deepest act of faith. Not to love with conditions, but to let love be what it is, wild, uncertain, untamable, and still say yes. So don't be afraid if love makes you foolish. Don't be afraid if it hurts. Don't be afraid if it asks you to change, again and again. For you are not meant to control it. You are meant to be moved by it. And when you trust that movement, when you surrender to the flow, you'll discover that the river was never separate from you at all. It was always you, all along, coming home to yourself.